Medin, bienvenidos, welcome. Well, we are just a few short days away from Towel Day, that wonderful holiday when us nerdy folk celebrate the writing of Douglas Adams. Douglas is most famous for writing comedic science fiction, like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. He also wrote a few episodes of Doctor Who. That's pretty cool. But perhaps my favorite of his work is the book Last Chance to See. In this book, Douglas recounts his adventures traveling the world with a zoologist named Mark Carwadine and learning about endangered animals. The passage I'm going to read today takes place on the island of Komodo. Yes, the home of that legendary giant lizard known as the Komodo dragon. Well, Douglas and Mark saw quite the show. They and a group of tourists from the USA watched as a freshly slaughtered goat was lowered into a pit of Komodo dragons that then ripped the carcass to shreds for their viewing pleasure. Lovely. Well, after heading back to town and skipping lunch because he no longer had any appetite, Douglas wandered around and sat on a beach, and thus begins the following passage. I went and sat on the beach by a mangrove tree and gazed out at the quiet ripples of the sea. Some fish were jumping up the beach and into the tree, which struck me as an odd thing for fish to do, but I tried not to be judgmental about it. I was feeling pretty raw about my own species, and not much inclined to raise a quizzical eyebrow at others. The fish could play about in trees as much as they liked, if it gave them pleasure, so long as they didn't try to justify themselves or tell one another it was a malign god who made them want to play in trees. I was feeling pretty raw about my own species because we presume to draw a distinction between what we call good and what we call evil. We find our images of what we call evil in things outside ourselves, in creatures that know nothing of such matters, so that we can feel revolted by them and, by contrast, good about ourselves. And if they won't be revolting enough of their own accord, we stoke them up with a goat. They don't want the goat. They don't need it. If they wanted one, they'd find it themselves. The only truly revolting thing that happens to the goat is in fact done by us. So why didn't we say something like, don't kill the goat? Well, there are a number of possible reasons. If the goat hadn't been killed for us, it would have been killed for someone else. For the party of American tourists, for instance. We didn't really realize what was going to happen until it was too late to stop it. The goat didn't lead a particularly nice life anyway, particularly not today. Another dragon would probably have got it later. If it hadn't been the goat, the dragons would have got something else, like a deer or something. We were reporting the incident for this book and for the BBC. It was important that we went through the whole experience so that people would know about it in detail. That's well worth a goat. We felt too polite to say, please don't kill the goat on our account. We were a bunch of lily-livered rationalizing turds. The great thing about being the only species that makes a distinction between right and wrong is that we can make up the rules for ourselves as we go along. The fish were still hopping harmlessly up and down the tree. They were about 3 inches long, brown and black, with little bobble eyes set very close together on the top of their heads. They hopped along using their fins as crutches. "Mud skippers," said Mark, who happened along at that moment. He squatted down to look at them. "What are they doing in the tree?" I asked. "You could say they were experimenting," said Mark. "If they find they can make a better living on the land than in the water, then in the course of time and evolution they may come to stay on the land. They absorb a certain amount of oxygen through their skin at the moment, but they have to rush back into the sea from time to time for a mouthful of water, which they process through their gills. But that can change. It's happened before." "What do you mean?" "Well, it's probable that life on this planet started in the oceans, and that marine creatures migrated onto the land in search of new habitats. There's one fish that existed about 350 million years ago that was very like a mud skipper. It came up onto the land using its fins as crutches. It's possible that it was the ancestor of all land-living vertebrates." "Really? What was it called?" "I don't think it had a name at that time." "So this fish is what we were like 350 million years ago." "Quite possibly." "So in 350 million years' time, one of its descendants could be sitting on the beach here with a camera around its neck watching other fish hopping out of the sea?" "No idea. That's for science fiction novelists to think about. Zoologists can only say what we think has happened so far." I suddenly felt, well, terribly old as I watched a mud skipper hop along with what now seemed to me like a wonderful sense of hopeless, boundless, naive optimism. It had such a terribly, terribly, terribly long way to go. I hoped that if its descendant was sitting here on this beach in 350 million years' time, with a camera around its neck, it would feel that the journey had been worth it. I hoped that it might have a clearer understanding of itself in relation to the world it lived in. I hoped that it wouldn't be reduced to turning other creatures into horror circus shows in order to try and ensure them their survival. I hoped that if someone tried to feed the remote descendant of a goat to the remote descendant of a dragon for the sake of little more than a shudder of entertainment, that it would feel it was wrong. I hoped it wouldn't be too chicken to say so. Well, thank you for watching, and happy Towel Day. Khudafiz, adios, and goodbye.